My name is Javiohn Seymore. I'm 24 years old. I live in Augusta, Georgia. You're asking me how did I get into fitness? Well, it's been a part of my life since as long as I can remember. I started off competing in martial arts. I did boxing, I did mixed martial arts, I did karate, I did all of it. Team sports wasn't necessarily my thing because I grew up in a single parent household. You could attribute that to that. As far as how I got into competitive bodybuilding, well, it wasn't until I was 14 years old and I was a freshman in high school trying to try out for the high school football team. But because of my years of competing in martial arts, I was so skinny, having no weightlifting experience, my coach just kind of looked at me like, I don't know. But anyway, they encouraged me to come out to their summer weightlifting program for the football players. At which point, I just lifted weights the whole summer with the football team. But that was when I decided, I love lifting weights more than I actually do football. And that's how, I got involved with fitness. I love training so much that I wanted to pursue bodybuilding. I wanted to get better at it. Of course, I started searching on YouTube how to get better with training. And I stumbled upon old videos of Lee Haney at the Olympia back when it was held in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's kind of what inspired me to compete in bodybuilding.
I think it's such a path that so many guys can relate to, going into high school. It kind of transitions to this thing where it's like you're in middle school and those kind of things like, they're not as on the forefront of your mind, I guess. And then just all of a sudden, you're amongst these men almost at this point going into high school. You have 18-year-olds. You're walking around with, and if it's sports, you're maybe practicing around or training around. So it becomes this thing and at least I know it did in my mind more during high school, and I'm sure a lot of guys' minds more like it's not necessarily I feel like a pressure, but it's like this thing where it's like, okay, I have to grow up both mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Right, right, exactly. And, part of it for me, I guess you could say part of it for me was I was trying to fit in with everybody else, you know? Like I said, I've never really been a team sports guy, and I'm still not to this day, to be honest with you. So, when it came to me being a freshman in high school, I wanted to try and fit in. I wanted to try and, you know, make friends, be like everyone else, right? Because that's what everyone was doing. But then again, like I said, when I first started, weight training, I mean, yeah, I made friends through it, but that was when I came to the realization. I was like, I really don't even like football. I just like, lifting weights and weight training. Now, as far as like how did I progress on with that? When I say that I fell in love with it, I genuinely did. Uh, to the point I asked for a personal trainer for Christmas. And literally, if it wasn't for that personal trainer who gave me the idea of competing in bodybuilding, but I was 14 years old at the time. I was really insecure, thinking that I wasn't good enough, I didn't have the potential to do it. And I stayed that way for pretty much all throughout my high school years. Now, granted, I was insecure that whole time, because you're stepping into a realm that you're not familiar with. So you don't know if you're ready, you don't know if you're good or anything like that. But I still, we were still training together for all throughout my years of high school. I had the same personal trainer for 4 years. And then, of course, when I became a freshman in college, that was when I was like, okay, maybe I can actually compete in bodybuilding. I did my first show, which was a natural show, NGA bodybuilding. And that was the very first show I won. And from that day, that kind of gave me the confidence to keep on going because it's like I said, I was an insecure guy, but now everyone is coming up to me asking me what's next.
Yeah.
And that's how I kept going with it. It wasn't until that following year I switched over to NPC. Um, didn't do too good at my first NPC show. I got fourth place. Later that year, I do another show. It was the Lee Haney Games, That was my first and last overall win in bodybuilding. And then after that, I just kept on competing through college, and it took me 3 tries to get my pro card. But I ended up turning pro at the age of 22.
Was there any was there any kind of person around you, whether it be a friend or just somebody close to you, whenever you got that initial like, hey, maybe you should try bodybuilding from that trainer, was did you share that with anybody, and was that like, did anybody maybe respond to that negatively?
Oh, of course. I mean, I wouldn't say negatively though. It was just more so that people didn't understand. Bodybuilding is pretty much, how can I say it? Not too many people know about bodybuilding. So of course, when you tell your family at the age of 14 that, hey, I think I want to compete in bodybuilding, and they're not familiar with it, they're kind of like, I can't see that just yet. You know what I mean? It wasn't a negative thing. It was just more so they didn't know what the journey would entail, you know?
Even myself getting really into fitness throughout my, I guess high school and then, moving forward, bodybuilding to me was never like, I was never into it from the sport perspective. I was more like, I like training. I like, maybe training kind of like bodybuilder-esque in a way, not really even kind of knowing what I do know now. But bodybuilding to me, it was just this like really far away thing. It wasn't what I considered, as much as it is now, tied together with the world of fitness.
Right. And it definitely is. It's grown a whole lot more since when I first started competing, that's for sure. Um, I mean, and to be fair, I kind of resonate with you when you said you got into bodybuilding just because you love to train. That's me all day. I never, and I hate to keep saying it, but back then I was a really insecure kid, man. I didn't think I was going to be good at it. I was more so doing it because, I love training. I love, working out with my personal trainer. We're going hard in the gym, you know, every single day. I loved it. And it was more so because of the fact that, you know, it was more so because of the fact that he believed in me more than I did myself. So I was willing to try. That is more so what, and quite frankly, that's what kept me going and competing initially for a while when I wasn't doing as well as I thought or should have, especially when your family starts supporting you, because before they didn't understand. Now, they're coming to these shows, they're watching you compete. They're starting to understand how prestigious it is just to diet and get on stage. So they're starting to support you more. And then they're starting to hear the compliments that people in the audience are giving you when you walk across the stage. When here I am, I'm like, I hope I do good, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think so many people can relate to not being sure of what they're doing is right. Like, I like this, I want to do this, but is this something that is right for me? Is my body going to respond? Or, if you're throwing it to like a business, or the customer's going to respond, or, am I right for this major in college? Or like, you can want something, you can put in the work, but at some point too, it has to be like a fit for you. It has to be right for you. So going through that and not knowing, and just still pushing and still having faith that it is, sometimes it does come down to somebody else for a short period of time, sometimes to be like, you know what, I believe in you. You should keep doing this. And that faith is powerful.
Very, very. When you're any competitor will talk about them being on low calories and stuff like that. Man, when you're in the trenches of prep, me especially back then, it was again, like I said, you know, I might not see the potential I have in myself, but everyone else does. And everyone is driving all these miles to come and watch me compete. The least I can do is just give it my all. Even if I don't place the way I should, at least I know I did everything in my power that I can control to make sure that I can give them a show. That was my primary motivator for the first couple of years of competing. Now, of course, when I start doing well, and I'm starting to see the potential that I have, then my confidence starts, you know, my confidence is a whole lot better than what it used to be.
This episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington based, community ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. Save 20% off your first order with the link below or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com.
Just, going through those battles, going through and coming out the other side is so much.
As far as obstacles and everything that I went through, like I said, I competed all throughout college. Obviously, bodybuilding is an expensive sport, and I know people ask questions about bodybuilding on a budget in college and everything like that. I was doing it all. I was working two jobs, trying to, pay for the food, pay for the show expenses, the travel fees, everything. Of course, I'm thankful enough to say that I had family that started to support me when I started doing well and competing, that they were willing to help me out just a little bit extra. And I mean, again, I was willing to do whatever I had to. I was willing to do whatever I had to just to make sure I could get the pro card. Back then, once I started realizing how good I was getting, I wanted that pro card so bad, and I wanted it fast. So, I was still going to class, but I was still going to work so I could make the money for competing. I wasn't really going out with friends back then. And that was also more so because the people I surrounded myself with understood the goals that I had as far as competing. So they understood, there was no going out on the weekends or during the weekdays, anything like that. Pretty much, and it's crazy to say this, but I think back then in college when I was competing, that was by far the most I'm focused. I'm focused. I'm going to school, coming home, go to work, go to the gym, repeat. It was literally that cycle until I got my pro card.
That's funny you say that because I have it I can relate to that, going to college, especially because I was away from home. I got into this cycle. I got into such a routine that when summer came around, I'd go home or getting out of college, my routine was just so much different and it was so kind of disturbed by new things I had to do or whatever it is. Um,
Mhm.
I could, I would love, just to have that opportunity that 4 years back where I can be like, you know what? Now that I know what I know, I'm going to put these 4 years into practice and work. And because I feel like I did utilize them well, but like really go back and be like, this opportunity is a true, almost like once in a lifetime opportunity. I was really kind of, even before I knew what kind of being dialed in was, I was kind of more dialed in that and then in a way than I am now.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and you're right. I didn't even think about it that way too. It's funny that you say that. I was more dialed in back then than I am now when it comes to competing because I mean, think about it. You're in college, you don't have that many responsibilities other
Yeah.
than the fact that you have to go to work to pay your bills if you're staying off campus. And all you have to do is just stay out of trouble and go to class. It was a whole lot more simpler. You had a set schedule.
Yeah.
Now, now that I'm graduated out of college and everything, my schedule is all over the place. Granted, when it's time for me to get out and get ready for these shows, it's almost like I can flip the switch and I can go back to that. I will say one thing, the more that I think about it now, I think back then the only part that made prep hard was that the fact that I would have to train real late at night, but still get up early in the morning. I mean, of course, back then I was pro card hungry. I was willing to do it, but God knows now I'm not willing to do that again. Training at midnight and then getting back up at 5 a.m. to do cardio, come back home, shower, then go to class, you know,
Right.
making sure you have your food. That was another thing back then. That was another thing back then. I had to, I used to keep a cooler in the trunk of my car and I would have to park my car across campus. And anytime when I had to go eat a meal, I would leave class, go all the way back to my car, get a meal out my cooler, and find some place to heat it up. Now I just come home and eat, you know.
Right.
There were so many different obstacles back then.
Just being hungry though, it's a different mindset. You look at it more with, I guess, different realities in it. And I think the same is true in life. Whenever you get something that's special and that's awesome, sometimes you hype up the getting, the end point more than realizing that the journey is really kind of the most important thing of it.
You definitely become accustomed to it because now you become accustomed to it, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, you can honestly look back at all those obstacles that you go through, and you pretty much wear it as a badge of pride because now you can handle anything to get what you want done. If you're really trying to go for a goal, you can remember, God, back then, I don't know how I was making this work. Now you're accustomed to it. Now you know exactly how to approach things, and nothing can stand in your way at that point. And sometimes you can't even have a set plan. It's more so, you really just have to get started. You have to get started. And then if an obstacle comes up your way, you have to figure out what you can do to get past it, how you can make your situation better. And then shortly after that, you realize nothing can stop you.
That's so true though. It's like you can't have the perfect plan. There's no such thing. You don't know what life is going to throw at you. You don't know what tomorrow, as much as you want to know, like every single thing that's going to happen, especially when you have this plan. It's not going to be realistic. It's a small thing, like something that happens to me sometimes. It's like I'll have this stuff in the fridge and I'm supposed to cook, and I don't cook it on that day. And when I go to cook it the next day or the day after, well, it's expired. So I'm like, a small setback, but it's like the smallest things can sometimes throw you the biggest of whirls. And it's like if you're not careful, it can throw you off track completely.
Exactly. You're 100% right.
Going into, I want to
Yes,
kind of
sir.
go back in time a little bit into whenever you were first starting to compete. You talked about like how much you loved training, but whenever you first stepped on stage, was it
Mhm.
something that you thought like, hey, this is what I expected it to be? This is how I expected to react? Or, what was that what was that first experience like for you?
Oh man. Just nervous, man. The idea initially at the time of walking across stage with your shirt off and having people judge you and they're looking at you judging you, that was, I'm not gonna lie to you, it was pretty strange to me. It was pretty strange to me. But then, and then not to mention, I didn't expect to, I didn't expect to do as well as I would the first try. You, does that make any sense?
Yeah, for
I, I
sure.
genuinely, I genuinely didn't expect it. But when you go out there and your friends and your family are out there in the crowd and they're screaming, hyping you up, they're the only people you can hear in that little auditorium or whatever. That gave me the confidence. I was like, okay, maybe I did pretty decent. And then I go out there and it's like a whole different person. God knows I didn't know how to pose back then. So I looked awkward. I looked like a robot, but I did it with a smile on my face. So it was very nerve-wracking to say the least for the very first time walking out there. But when I went out there and I heard my family, my friends out there screaming, and again, I had no idea how to pose. I looked awkward up there, but I did it with a smile on my face. But it was nerve-wracking. I'll say that.
This episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington-based, community-ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. Save 20% off your first order with the link below or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com. This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
And you mentioned like getting up there and having people judge you and look at you and critique you really. Do you feel like for you you critique yourself and you judge yourself, very much more harshly than the judges, to some degree, maybe even unrealistic, especially, kind of during that prep phase.
I always, when I first started competing initially, I compared myself to these Olympians because I knew that was the end goal for me. My end goal was I wanted to make it to Olympia just one time. Um, so I guess you could say yes, actually, because I started off comparing myself to these Olympians that I was looking up to at the time. And then, it was funny. My coach actually pulled me to the side and he was like, "Hey, you're literally just getting started. You're on a whole they're on a whole different level." He pretty much kept me humble and kept me focused on myself, not even necessarily at myself, but just focusing at the task at hand. Do the best you can with what you got and keep going because you're not going to do anything but constantly improve anyway. If you constantly compare yourself to these top Olympians when you're just first getting started, you're not doing anything but making yourself miserable.
I think it's a natural thing that we do because see we want to see progress. And I think it's so hard to see progress from ourselves because we see ourselves every day. We can't really look in the mirror and be like, oh, this looks, a percentage better than it did yesterday. But we can, for whatever reason, we look at, whether it be you're in business or bodybuilding or whatever, and you're like, oh, this person made $1 million last year, and I made 100,000 last year, so I can see what work I have to do. I can see the level that I am. But unfortunately, like you said, it does lead to why am I not there? It leads to forgetting about doing the work to get there. Sometimes it's like instead of getting back in the gym and working hard and doing the things that will get you there, it can lead to that mindset of, you know what, I'll never get there, or it's impossible for me, or they're lucky, or they have good genes, or whatever kind of things that we tell ourselves sometimes. So it's definitely a double-edged sword or it can be the good, it can be the bad of falling into the trap of looking at, putting people um putting something as a goal is different than thinking that this is where you should be.
The best advice, and see, that's another thing too. While I was competing and going for the pro card, even up till this past year, to be honest with you, I would always try and measure my success based on how well I was placing. That would mess me up mentally too, because everyone wants to win. Everyone. You don't get into competing to not win. Everyone wants first place. Everyone wants that overall. But the sad thing about this, in bodybuilding, there is no guarantee. No matter how good you look, it can be the best physique you've ever displayed, and yet you still place 16, or yet you still place 11, like how I did in my pro debut. I Back then I always tried to measure my success based on my placings to the point, I'm like, oh man, I got 11th my pro debut. Maybe I'm not ready to be a competitive pro yet. So I just stopped competing that year. I just stopped. I was like, I'm not ready to be a pro. Uh, Not even making top five first call outs, anything like that. And it wasn't until, the best piece of advice that I was told right after my pro debut, he I was told that bodybuilding isn't about how well you place in these competitions. It's about looking back and seeing the progress that you made, getting better from when you first started. And that was when my whole mindset changed. And now I know everyone says I post a lot of old photos. I look back at my old photos, you can just see the progression. You're not getting worse, you're constantly getting better. You might not be getting the placings that you want right now, but as long as you're willing to continue to put in the work daily, consistently, whatever the case may be, as long as you're willing to put in that work, it's going to pay off sooner or later.
Definitely, the hard part about bodybuilding that I've learned from so many people kind of saying the same thing that you are is like everybody does want to win. Everybody, even if they don't necessarily say, "Hey, I'm entering this to win," they would be happy if they did win. Like it's just a simple way of life. Like people are happy when they win. But at the same time, it's a sport where the stage is such a small percentage of it. The competition is really where nothing happens. It's just where you go to show people what did happen before you got there.
Exactly. The actual showing, the actual walking across stage, that's literally just amount of work that you put in leading up. Again, that's the sad part about it. You can show up with your best physique of all time and still not get the placing that you deserve. But it's like I said, as long as you can look back at your past showings, even from when as back as you first started competing, and you can constantly see the improvements that you're making, you know you're moving in the right direction.
Right.
So there's, I used to get, like I said, I used to get, really upset mentally about it. But then, I'm like, I'm making constant progress a little bit faster than I should. I know I'm heading in the right direction. It's only going to pay off sooner or later.
So, once you got that pro card, you do a show and you kind of understand more like, hey, this is what this is going to be like. This is being a pro. What changed for you? What did you optimize?
When I turned pro and I did my pro debut, I came in 11th place. The judges told me that I had a good shape, but I needed to add some actual density to my physique. And I don't want to say the only changes that I made with my training from then on was I actually started training harder. So I could actually, build the size. Now, granted, did I have to train smarter? Yes, I had to make sure that I was putting the size in the proper areas. So my training splits were very custom. As far as nutrition, I realized that I had to take in a little bit more food if I was going to grow so I could stand up next to these guys on stage. But, it's like I said about that journey is that, leading up to like getting the pro card and you're not getting the placements that you should. The crazy part is all those pros that I looked up to when I was younger, when I was pro card hungry, when I stepped backstage at my pro debut and I'm standing right behind these guys getting ready to walk out, I was like, oh, these guys are not too much bigger than me. They're not too much different than me. So, I realized back then that I just wasn't ready then. When the things that you want don't come as fast, it's just preparation, it's not punishment. As far as like the training, I just trained a little bit harder so I could build up the size necessary. I made sure that I was putting it in the right areas. And then I came back this past year in 2022 and I was placing in the first call outs 3 times. I placed in the first call outs every single show that I did.
Moving forward into the future, obviously still very young, still a lot of time to grow, to develop, to achieve the things that you want to achieve. What does 2023 look like for you? Do you have a kind of a game plan?
Well, I did have part of the game plan. Earlier, I was going to hop into the shows early this year. And that's more so just because I live in Georgia. There's not that many pro shows near Georgia. But, there are in South Carolina. So they're a little bit closer to home. I don't have to travel as far. Last year in 2022, I was all over the place. I was in Texas. I was in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I had to come back to Atlanta. I was all over the place. But my plan was to hop into the pro shows earlier this year. And ultimately, my goal is the same as anyone else. I just want to make it to the Olympia just one time. You know, Bodybuilding isn't big where I live. We do have some pros here, but not a lot compared to most of these big cities. My end goal for bodybuilding is just to make it to the Olympia just one time so I can put my city on the map and, have, of course, have my supporters, my mom in there in the crowd. I mean, that's my ultimate goal as far as bodybuilding. Will that happen this year? I mean, that's what I'm working towards. But if it's God's will, it's God's will.
Yeah, really, really cool way to look at it. I think it takes a lot of pressure off yourself. All you have to do is the hard part, I guess, really put the work in and continue to do it day in and day out.
Exactly. But hey, that's what we all live for when we're competitors in bodybuilding. So
Right. Yeah. It's the love of the somebody said it on the podcast. It's doing the mundane, kind of the same thing every day. And if you're meant for it, you're meant for it. If you're not, then it's probably not going to last too long.
100%. That person was 100% right.
It was really good getting to talk to you. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
That was no problem, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.